Hey everybody, welcome to another drive-through board game blog. And today I'm going to cover my top 10 games from 2011. And you may ask why 2011 is kind of a random year. Well, I get asked a lot to go back and re-review games that I played years ago. And so I started doing the reviews at the beginning of 2011. And so it's been 6 years now. And so it's hard to do that though, because I sat down and was kind of walking through all the videos I did back at the beginning, and has my opinion really changed? Not really. I don't think substantially enough to provide any kind of further insight. There may be some games that are more insightful. And also about a year ago, I think it was maybe a little bit less than a year ago, I did a top 10 games from like all of history up through the year 2000. And so I was kind of trying to follow up with that. And I had some discussion with some various different folks. Do I keep doing that or whatever? Going back up through the years after the year 2000, it's kind of tricky. So, I kind of took a break in there from gaming. I played a lot between like 1999 into 2005. In there, we gamed off and on, but more frequently towards the latter part of that and so on. And I kind of took a little bit of a break just because, different reasons. And so I was trying to kind of coagulate all of this. And I got to about 2010, as I was kind of walking through and reviewing and say, what's going to be an interesting video? 2010, you can go look at my top 100 video, and like whatever game was from 2010, just work from number 1 and go backwards. And that would be my top 10, because nothing's really changed then. So anyway, I just want to jump into the top 10 games of 2011, and it's kind of retrospective because that was the first year I did reviews and all that kind of stuff. So let me just jump in. I'll do two real quick honorable mentions before I get into the rest of these. They are a Game of Thrones, the second edition. Now this one would be very, very high on the list if it wasn't an honorable mention, but I didn't feel it was right because it wasn't really published in 2011. Second edition was, which also included like the first expansion from the first edition. So it's not really a 2011 game, and it would probably be, easily in the top 5 of this list, so just so you know. And the other one is Eclipse, which really should be in the top 10 of this and very high up in the top 10, but it's kind of slowly been replaced. So it's kind of like, I think Game of Thrones and the Eclipse, if I was listing what I thought the best games were, they'd certainly be at the very, very top of the list. Probably top 3 for both of them, honestly. But Eclipse is kind of being shoved out of my collection. You can kind of see it there behind me there. But I've got Clash of Cultures and also Forbidden Stars, which is directly behind me. And those have really started to push out Eclipse. I still think Eclipse is great. I don't necessarily think the other games are better than Eclipse. I just will get these other 2 games to the table, more often than I will Eclipse, for sure, 100%. If you ask me, would you rather play Forbidden Stars or Clash of Cultures or Eclipse, I would be torn between Forbidden Stars and Clash of Cultures, and Eclipse would be a very close second place or third place, but definitely a second or third place. Not that one game is better than the other game, it's just that's my current choosing. And the last thing I want to mention here, and this is kind of dovetailing off my point I just made, is my problem with these top 10s and top 100s, and not so much the folks that are presenting them, and not so much all the folks that are watching them, but some of the folks that watch them kind of assign like a gospel to the list. And they really equivocate, and sometimes when people present it, and I'm guilty with this, you kind of go back and forth between the difference between number 2 and number 3. Which, especially when you do a top 100 games, is ridiculous and silly. It does not matter the order when you have a giant list of 100 games. If any game is in your top 10, then it's all number 1, right? That's just how it is. I think to me that feels correct. So that's the one thing I try to get across, and I probably bore everybody to tears because I usually make this kind of same point every time. But this is not like the gospel top 10. This is always in progress, always in motion. Everything's always in motion. And so this is just currently my little snapshot. And these are all things that have stayed in my collection, though. I think that's a very important thing because they've stayed in here. Foreseeable future, they're probably going to stay in there. So anyway, just want to get to that. The whole thing is a process. The top 10 is not best to worst or best to not as best. It's a process of going through the games and wanting to play all 10 games on the list equally, actually, I think in this case. But just, you know, it's just different. Okay, number 10 is a King of Tokyo, and this is one that almost made my top 100 list when I was doing that list. Very, very fun game. Had a chance to play this with the family, with the game group, and with the lunch group. Don't bring it out at lunch too much because it is kind of noisy and loud. So, you know, it's not really appropriate for a workplace environment, but we have brought it out a couple times. And so families loved it. The game group has loved it. The game group has not played it for some time, but there was a period of time where it was coming out multiple times every week that we got together, and we all had a good time with it. It's one of the rare exceptions for me because I don't particularly go after Yahtzee style games as a general rule, just because, you know, it's just some kind of idiosyncrasy with myself that I don't really like that mechanic. But for here it works because you've got crazy number of cards, cool, funky, cartoonish creatures, lots of wild abilities, and a real good kind of yin and yang with the different ways that you can win the game. So that is number 10, King of Tokyo. Number 9 is Omen, Reign of War. Now this is a game by the designer John Cloudis, and he does his own games. He's got a company called Small Box Games. He does all his own designs, his own publishing. He does outsources art. The pictures you're seeing here are from the Omega edition, which I think is the, as the name might suggest, kind of the final rendition, the final version of the game. And you can still get this from time to time. He will do like a Kickstarter to reprint it. He did one a couple of months ago. Definitely, if he does it again, certainly pick it up. Now, this is a game that you've seen sort of a lot of copycats. Not necessarily copycats, because I think they're all kind of designed in their own silos. But you have these games where you have sort of a center kind of row of cards, and you're playing cards to different columns and things, trying to take control of locations. Or in the case of this game, kind of balancing taking control of locations versus doing kind of cool feats and accomplishing tricks and combos with your cards to score those instead. So again, you gotta have a yin and yang between those two avenues for victory. Now the Omega Edition's got a bunch of different kind of, you know, bonuses and extra cards and stuff like that you can add into. I would say if you've not played it, to go into and just play the base game, play that a bunch of times, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. And then you can start to add in the extras, because the extras do add a good chunk, and I think they're very fun after you play the game a lot. But it's a very kind of different game. The pacing of the game is different, because when you first start to play the games are going to kind of end quickly. You can get kind of caught off guard. You might not, you know, hedge your bets in the right way in terms of kind of the card advantage of the cards that you have in your hand and the resource advantage to play the big cards. So you have to really kind of watch out for that kind of stuff, and then get it to a point where you're playing with somebody that has, you know, played as much as you, or you guys have played together a lot. And then you'll have some really, really good games come out of it. So it's very, very kind of a subtle game, I think. But it's got all this cool kind of special abilities, kind of like Magic the Gathering. And again, it has that good yin and yang, that back and forth balance between, you know, grabbing locations and kind of being a beat stick out on the field versus trying to set up certain types of cards that you can get. Because there's kind of like 3, 4 classes of cards that can do different things and react different ways with some of the goals you try to accomplish. So that's Omen, Reign of War. Definitely pick that up. It's a little bit rare, but not too rare, I think. Number 8 is Lancaster. And you can see here, this has got a picture of the big box edition. I think this is the only edition that you can pick up nowadays, which is good because it's got a couple of expansions bundled in. It's got a nice little insert and all that to keep all the components very well organized and easy to break out. This is a very, very different kind of a worker placement game, and it's a real kind of a straddle of kind of a hybrid game, but not like Ameritrash and Euro, but like a weird negotiation into Euro game, because you've got laws that you can vote on that are going to affect scoring, affect you know, different sort of mechanics in the game, and you've got the worker placement mechanic that is more than just like put a worker out and do something. You've got different strength of workers. You've got little squires that you can send along with your worker to kind of bump people out of a spot. and you're sort of collecting these nobilities and building up your own castle to give you more influence and when it comes to the voting stage. And then you've almost got like this sort of semi-co-op kind of thing, but if you don't like semi-co-ops, don't let that scare you away, because it's not really semi-co-op in the mechanics. It just kind of feels that way, where you are sort of doing a little bit of a push your luck brinkmanship kind of idea with invasions from France. And you guys are controlling England and trying to sort everything out after the kings have died or whatever. So that's kind of a weird thing where you're trying to go up there and get points, but you want other people to help you a little bit and stuff like that too, so you can accomplish the goal. So there's a lot of kind of cool different stuff going on for a kind of Euro worker placement kind of idea. So definitely recommend this game if you've not played it. I think you can get it kind of on the cheap. It's a Queen Games production, and those seem to come out and be relatively okay price Kickstarters, and then you can get a bargain on it not too long after that. So definitely look for a bargain on that one, because you can find one. Number 7 is a game that I did not play back in 2011. These other ones I did, but this one I did not play until a couple of years ago. And this is a Dwarf King, and this is a Bruno Faiduti game. This is one of those trick-taking games with a twist kind of ideas. And this is a very, very fun and funky take on it, and probably one day or the other is going to be my favorite in this genre, because there's lots of wacky goals that you can get to change up what the desired cards are that you're going to collect. And there's some special cards with some different special effects and things like that too. But it's basically a standard trick-taking game that you're going to have different scoring every round, so the strategy is going to change. Sometimes you want tricks, sometimes you don't want tricks, sometimes you want very specific tricks with very specific cards, and that's what's going to give you your points. And there's a lot of different goals in there, and there's a lot of goals to kind of choose from over the course of the game, and that makes it very interesting because you can sit down, you can play it, and each hand within that session is going to be very different mindset going into how you're trying to slough off cards or kind of dominate and hopefully control where the tricks go and stuff like that. There's even goals that you want players to your left and right to win tricks, which is very, very weird. But it's a very, very fun game, nicely illustrated and all that kind of good stuff. Again, this is probably one of my favorite games in that whole trick-taking style genre. And the next one is 10-9-8-7-6 is Rapa Nui, and this one I apologize for because I think this is one that's tricky to find. It's never been brought, to my knowledge, over to the United States. You have to go print out the rules on BGG, which are fine. There is no real text on any of the cards or anything. That is game rule text. There's a couple of player aids that have German text on them. This is a weird, wonky, wacky game. This has been a big time favorite with my lunch group. And it's basically a stock game where you have kind of 4 columns of these different cards that you're pulling and drafting to add to your hand and to play. And you are sort of triggering these like production events. Depending on the type of card that you reveal underneath it, you're going to trigger wood production or fish production, and you get these different resources that you can then sacrifice to the gods, and then you're going to then try to have these different sets of these cards to score and get the most points for the different sets. And then there's some other cards that will just give you straight points, like you can build these white temples and activate these priests, which will give you points during the game, and so on. So you're kind of watching these sort of markets, these columns of cards almost become markets, and you're trying to think like, how many of these cards have come by? What's the probability? Am I trying to really dominate a certain type because you get bonuses if you have the most of things and stuff like that? So it's a really different game, very, very light in a way, but very engaging in the player-to-player type of thing. And there's a little bit of bluffing with kind of the sacrifice phase when you put some of the cards on the sacrifice stone. Now there's a couple ways you can actually play that, just so you know. We've played around with like face-up sacrifices where you kind of see what everybody else is doing, or kind of simultaneous, or just all face down, or one face up because you flop one off the deck. So you can kind of play with that. Yeah, it doesn't really matter to me. It just kind of changes up how you approach that phase. But very, very interesting game. Definitely track it down if you can. I wouldn't pay too much for it, but it's really fun and very different. I have not seen a game really quite like this. It's by the designer of Carcassonne as well. So very, very fun game. Now, number 5 is Castles of Burgundy. Big surprise. This is the Stefan Feld game. I think this was not my first Stefan Feld game. It was one of my first Stefan Feld games, but this one keeps coming out, mostly with the family. This is probably, I think it was the kind of the top family game. It was in the top 5 for sure. But this one is really cool. Very, very simple mechanics. Lots of different, points and ways to score points, and sort of little minor kind of combos you can do with the 2 dice. A lot of people have talked a ton about Castles of Burgundy. I did a pretty extensive review of it. And there's been other reviews, of course. This is one I would say everybody should try this game and see if they really like it. Maybe give it 1 or 2 whacks, because it can be a little bit like, whoa, what's going on? There's all these different tiles, and I can ship stuff, and I can, get workers, and and I can buy things sometimes and use my dice for other things. So definitely give this one maybe 2 plays. But I think most people should enjoy this game, I would expect. I've actually played this at lunch at work, believe it or not. We played it, this was way back, I think it was in 2011 actually. We played a 2-player game of it. We got it done in 45 minutes. Now, we had both played the game a few times, I think. I'd played it a few times. I'm not sure if my opponent had played it a few times. But yeah, so you can get it done pretty quick. 45 minutes for a 2-player game, no problem. We were kind of rushing, I remember, but had a success with it, definitely with the gamer group and with the family, and I've talked to so many people that really love this game. It's one of their favorite games of all time. Not much else really to say about this that hasn't been said. Castle of Burgundy. And number 4 is Eminent Domain, and this is for sure one of my favorite card games. Now, it's kind of a deck building game. It kind of takes some hints from Race for the Galaxy with the different kind of rolls you can do, the way the different phases work when you're trying to sort of build up and colonize planets in your display, or you're trying to do shipments and production and trade and get points that way. It's got a ton of combos and different things, especially once you add the expansion. There's so many different things you can, upgrade your special cards to, and that's kind of where the deck building comes in. And this one, though, I think this one is really best as you learn the game as a 2, 3, and then a 4-player game. When you're first learning the game, the 4-player vibe, the 4-player pacing, is a little bit hard to handle, because the game can end pretty quickly. But you're like, I was just starting to figure out how to play, and then after you play a couple times, I was just starting to figure out what to do, and then the game is over. It's not one of those that'll end like right as it gets good. It ends before it gets good when you play, especially with 3, and it's like a 3-player short game and then a 4-player game. My favorite way to play a game is a 3-player long game. Because I like it with more players. I like that little bit extra time to kind of go after things. But, as you play it more, you start to be able to know all of the cards that are available, especially as you add the expansions. That's the only thing about the expansions is if you throw everything in there, it's like, what? This is like the hugest tech tree I've ever seen. What does this card do? How's that going to interact? Is that a good card? I don't know. She took this card. She's kicking my butt with this one, there's a lot to go into. So that's probably my one kind of knock against. It's not really a knock, because it's just like there's so many options to choose from once you get Exotica and was it Escalation or whatever the other expansions are. So yeah, and this is one I would say the base game, get that if you've not played it, and then get the first expansion. But I don't think the first expansion is one of those that's like necessary to fix the game. But I think it's necessary after you've played the base game, X number of times. I would say 100% you should get that first expansion. But don't dive into that, right away, similar to kind of what I was saying about Omen, where you want to have them there, you want to kind of learn the game, get good at the base game, and then start adding in that first expansion, and you get some really funky ways to kind of make it a little bit more asymmetrical and things like that, and you add in a lot more cooler technologies and things. But I definitely think the expansions are worth it. They're just not necessary. I think you could get away with not playing with the expansions at all if you really wanted to, if you didn't want to get that crazy amount of combos and technology cards. Anyway, so that is number 4, Eminent Domain. Now number 3 is Airlines Europe. This is another kind of family favorite. It's stayed in the collection largely because of that, but the gamer group has also liked it as well. This is kind of what I would sort of prefer people play. Well, that sounds really jerky. I'm gonna leave it in there. I was gonna edit that out. I'm like, don't say that. But this is what I would prefer. What I would prefer to play. That's a much better way of saying that, you jerk. And over Ticket to Ride. Now it's the same designer, Alan Moon, and this one though has almost the same simplicity as Ticket to Ride. Granted, it's not as simple because Ticket to Ride is either take cards or play cards. This one has a little bit more you can do, and it has a little bit of kind of money and economy, but there's so much, again, subtlety with this game that really has just locked it in. And this, I think, is a true classic of a game, honestly. Honestly, it's probably the best game on this list. I think if you were to transport yourself into 100 years, even number 1 and 2 I've got on my list, Airlines Europe is the one I think will still be around like 100 years. I mean, 100 years. I'm not joking. 100 years from now, I think people will still be playing Airlines Europe. We'd be in good shape. If we're still around, let me caveat that. If people are around, someone will be playing Airlines Europe, hopefully, unless it's like Mad Max. But even then, someone will remember the rules and the card counts. Somebody will exist. All right, I'm totally going off track, but I'm gonna leave that in. So Airlines Europe is fantastic, elegant. There's lots of subtleties to the way the board shakes out, what you go after. You're putting out these airlines out onto the board and trying to invest in stock and kind of back different ones and try to be the leader of them. And there's a real kind of interesting pacing in terms of like, okay, I'm taking cards, I'm building up the airline. Am I building it up for somebody else? They've got a ton of cards they've been hoarding, and I've built up yellow, and they're going to lay down a bunch of yellow stock, or just there's yellow cards, but what it is stock. So that's what keeps it interesting. And then as the routes kind of get gobbled up, like how much further can I drive this up? Is it really worth it to buy those extra airlines to bump it up into the next bracket so it scores that many more points? All very, very, very simple. You either pay some money, throw out some airlines, and then you grab a card. Or you lay some cards down from your hand and those become stock when they're in front of you, and you get a little bit of money when you do that. Or you can trade in cards for this one weird airline, which is really cool, but you just trade some cards for that, and there's nobody ever buys planes in that, and then or else you take money. So that's it. You do one of those 4 actions, and it just goes around. It does actually work very well with 2 players. It's got a weird kind of funky 3rd player kind of thing. I have played it with 2 players, and I did enjoy it. That's not certainly something I would say going with your first play, maybe, because it's just you get that extra kind of crutch to mess with. But after you played a few times, you should be able to pick up kind of why they made the design decisions they did to make it work with 2 players. So, but it plays good all the way up to the other counts as well. Again, 100 years. Mark my words, YouTube. Don't delete this video, and we're gonna see. I will be gone. Yes, I will be gone. But people will still be playing Airlines Europe. Trajan is my number 2, another Stefan Feld game. This one is my favorite Stefan Feld game. I go back and forth between this and Bor, but I think this is my favorite over that one. This is a really funky game. It's got a lot of interlocking mechanics and locations on the board to do crazy things, and you start to put out workers and activate your Trajan tiles and move your military guy around and ship goods and just run up a Senate track and try to get quote-unquote votes for that. The real heart of the game is that sort of Moncala type of thing where you're dropping tokens and getting little bonuses and trying to sort of beef up your actions and all that kind of stuff. Really kind of obtuse. I would say certainly through your first play, maybe your second play. I think it took me 2 full plays at the time to begin to understand what's interesting and what's fun and what's cool about the game. Several more plays to kind of figure out how to react to what the other players are doing and all that kind of good stuff. So this is a game that you're going to get a lot of mileage out of, and it is really a very, very interesting design in terms of, you know, what you can do and how to sort of time everything and how you can kind of get yourself kind of screwed up with the Mancala and all that kind of good stuff. And it's just a really, really heady design. I don't want to talk too much about mechanics or anything here. Again, I did a pretty extensive review of this, and there's been other reviews. If you want to learn how to play the game, definitely watch that. But yeah, this is another one I definitely recommend, and give it, again, 1 or 2 plays. Like I said with Burgundy, just to kind of get through that initial learning curve. But definitely highly recommend that one. And my last game is Urban Sprawl. And I'm being shot with bullets because nobody likes this game, even in my game group. Nobody likes the game. So there's something wrong with me, I guess, but I really like this game. I might get snarky. I'm gonna get sort of snarky, but it's tongue-in-cheek because we're all friends. But I think nobody has actually played SimCity on the computer, because the biggest complaint that I hear about this game is the level of disasters and events and things that kind of unfold, and they're out of my control. And I'm like, isn't that exactly what happens in SimCity? Honestly, it's been probably since the 90s that I played a SimCity game. So I don't have a good recollection, but I thought the whole thing was you kind of micromanage people for a while, and then this stuff happens, and then it all goes and you kind of recover. So that's what Urban Sprawl really is. Now it's got a bit more going on than that, because you're trying to sort of control the different locations, you know, on the board with your colored little Tetris blocks, and you're trying to get yourself set up in certain neighborhoods and kind of control those neighborhoods in a way, and then get yourself set up to actually win elections based on how you're controlling the board. And that is really the trick of the game. Now the events in there are certainly in there to throw that all out of balance and make it wacky. I've seen there's some variants online about how you kind of shuffle events and stuff like that, but once you play it a couple of times, you are prepared to a degree to deal with the events and deal with, you know, the elections as they come up and some of the different kind of payouts and things that'll get triggered. And so to me, it feels very, very realistic, almost to the level of simulation. I mean, it's like simulated chaos and that kind of stuff. Now, the designer Chad Jensen, admittedly, he does another one of my favorite games, which is Combat Commander, which you can sort of see, not like design hallmarks, but you can see kind of that same vibe with the amount of chaos from card flips and things that's going to happen. So this one, I don't recommend this one. Honestly, I love it. I think it's great. It works fantastic 2-player. It's a great, amazing 2-player game. I would say that's my favorite way to play the game, because that's honestly the only time I can get people to play it with me. I played over Vassal a few times, and it works great as a 2-player game there. You got to play it live though. It's not one of those you can play by email. A lot of Vassal games are nice because you can like take your turn, email, okay, you know, get back to me tomorrow when you take your turn. This one doesn't really work that way because there's so much that can happen. But I would say if you do play it over Vassal, play it live with somebody, block out a few hours, and then play it. But this one I feel like is probably better with 4-player. But honestly, a lot of people don't like this game. I think there's like a very, 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 very tiny hardcore fan base of this game that understands the game and gets it, and it just, you know, it jives with them and nobody else. But I really enjoy it. It's one you got to play a few times, and you have to come at it with, see, this is the weird thing about it. Like, you can't come in with like this kind of a stodgy Euro train game attitude. You've got to come at it with more the Ameritrash attitude, but this isn't the type of game that a Ameritrash player likes to play. So, you know, so because it's boring city management, you know, it's not really that exciting of a theme. And it's too chaotic for somebody that wants to like lock in the math and optimize the strategy. You know, you're going to get screwed out of stuff. So, but I've not seen really any bad outcomes. I've seen some weird things happen. People are like, oh God, it's event. And then, you know, election, you know. But then it kind of mitigates and shakes that out, and you have a kind of peaceful time. Everybody gets kind of set up. You can kind of bide your time and get yourself a little nook or cranny in a different part of the board. Yeah, and then you can, if you get kind of behind, you usually catch up if you play right. I've seen that, you know, come from behind victories, or you almost, you know, you're down by like 40 and you lose by 2 at the end. You just kind of learn to ride that wave. You know, none of this is helpful to anybody, but I really recommend it if you give it a try. Maybe throw on the Vassal module, and if you got a friend that you can try it with and work through a little bit. And then you can kind of see, if you just, the thing is, it goes a little bit long, I think, for people. It certainly is a long game. It's going to take you 3, 4, you play 4 players, you know, up to 5 hours. Maybe longer, you know, because especially as you're learning the game. If you sat down with 4 new players, everybody who learned, you know, had the rules, and you did the rules, and you did that, it would take forever. But yeah, so I think it's an excellent experience, a great game. I really get attached to the whole city vibe of it, kind of that cutthroat election, politicking kind of thing, different neighborhoods, different types of buildings, trying to just score and do, you know, kind of do a push your luck kind of thing. Yeah, so it all kind of works very, very well as a cohesive whole. It's a little long. I mean, it goes long, that's for sure. So I don't think, like I said, you know, Airlines Europe, I think is going to be played in 100 years. I'd rather play Urban Sprawl, definitely. And if I had the time in the day, you know, I would certainly pick Urban Sprawl. Here's the thing, if I had the time, I would rather play 1 game of Urban Sprawl than, you know, 3, 4 games of Airlines Europe. That's it. So anyway, there's my top 10. Like I said, all those caveats at the beginning. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll try to move into 2012. It's, you know, I'll give it a few months. I'll kind of like catch up to like 5 years ahead, and then, you know, we'll see how I feel like next year, maybe just wrap through it all. But I will do I know people have asked me about a top 100. I will do kind of like a board game shelf overview. Usually it's like a 45-minute video. I did that once. People seem to really like that one. I'll just kind of blow through my shelves and stuff and talk about the stuff I have on my shelf at work and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a top 100. I just won't order them because the order doesn't matter. Okay, thanks.